Hi, my name is Professor Ian Williamson, and I am the Dean of the Merage School of Business here at the University of California, Irvine. Welcome to another part of the 2022 homecoming celebration here at the University of California, Irvine. Homecoming is one of those times where oftentimes it's about coming back and gathering and reflecting, but also it gives you a chance to look forward and talk about the things you're excited about going forward. And so today we have with us a group of experts, faculty here at the Merage School of Business, and we're going to talk about 2022 and get their perspectives on what they think will be some of the issues that will impact 2022 in terms of the business community and the business climate, and some perspectives or maybe advice they might have for business leaders. So let me introduce our fantastic panelists. We have with us Dr. Tanya Bradford, who's Associate Professor of Marketing, as well as the University of California, Irvine Inclusive Excellence Term Chair Professor. Thank you, Tanya, for taking the time to join us. We have with us Dr. Vijay Gursabani, who is the Taco Bell Professor of Information Systems and Computer Science, as well as the Director of the Center for Digital Transformation, which is based here in the Merage School. Vijay, it's great to see you again. And finally, we have Dr. Chris Swartz, who is the Associate Professor of Finance, as well as the Faculty Director of our Center for Investment and Wealth Management, which is also based here in the Merage School. Thank you very much, Chris. So everyone, I think the question everybody wants to hear is what's going to happen in 2022? Of course, maybe that's a little bit too big of an ask, but maybe we'll start with this. Based on your research and your expertise, what do you think are some of the issues or key issues that will play a critical factor in shaping the business climate in 2022? And maybe Chris, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I'm sure many people already have seen a lot of articles about we don't have enough stuff, right? Supply chain issues, computer chips, you go to the grocery store and you can't find the exact thing you're looking for. But really, I think one of the supply chain issues we haven't talked enough about is the lack of people to hire. There's a lot of talk about there's still people missing from the workforce. Most of those people are 55 years and older who have probably taken all the money they made from their real estate and the stock market and are sitting on a beach somewhere and they're never coming back again. And the unemployment rate's almost down to where it was before the pandemic started. So we're basically out of people again. And so, I think a lot of firms, if your firm's hiring out there, my guess is you're having a very difficult time finding qualified workers or even retaining your workers. So the quit rate here in the United States is at an all-time high. I just did a talk for a company with 5,000 people here in Irvine. And the quit rate's so high, I told them to imagine 1,800 people were no longer there a year from now, and how difficult it would be and costly to replace them. So, my advice really for businesses is to find and hoard talent, because this problem is not really a problem that's going to go away, since our demographics, essentially our working age population is actually declining now. And so this is going to be kind of a long-term issue that we have.
So access to talent will be a big issue, and how organizations address that. Tanya, what are your thoughts? What do you think you're focusing on?
I really appreciate what you said, Chris, and piggybacking onto that, what's happening on the other side is that consumers' expectations of the marketplace have significantly changed, not only in their perspective as working in the marketplace, but also engaged in the marketplace, trying to acquire those goods and services. Companies pre-pandemic were really working hard to increase the level of technology that they were employing in both the delivery of offerings in terms of their manufacture, but also how they reach their consumer. The pandemic comes and they had to accelerate their use of technology, even with all of the supply chain problems. It's had a couple of impacts. One, they've been able to deal with some of the employee issues that you spoke of, Chris. They're also able to reach consumers that they've never reached before, which is also impacting them in significant ways because now they may not have enough supply to meet that demand. The other thing that's happened is consumers' expectations have also shifted. As more and more individuals are working remotely, are figuring out that they can acquire goods and services from around the world just from their phone, it's really changing how they're interacting with the marketplace and what those expectations are. So when I think about 2022, I see that companies that had thought perhaps they'd be able to go back to kind of the before times, as I like to call them, that time is never coming back again. They're actually going to have to move even faster into the future and thinking about how do they begin anticipating these just continually evolving expectations that consumers have and using both human capacities and technical capacities to meet and exceed those expectations if they have a chance at holding on to those consumers. So I think 2022 could be a really cool year if you're able to hoard those employees, but also to give them some very meaningful work to do in ways that they can set out to delight their consumers, because that's what consumers are looking for in this new marketplace.
So Tanya brought up increased expectations and maybe technology being one of the ways that might be brought to bear to address those expectations. If we're going to talk about technology, Vijay, I have to get your thoughts on that. What are your perspectives? What are the things you're thinking about for 2022?
Sure. So I'm going to build off what both Chris and Tanya said. And first, the silver lining to the audience today is that jobs for you will be plentiful, and you will have a lot more power in the labor market than you've ever had. So that's the good news for all of us. Probably not such good news for the dean who has to hire all of us. But on a sort of more practical basis, when you think about what Chris said, which is the shortage of talent, and what Tanya's talking about, changing customer expectations or consumer expectations. So my version of it is, at the end of the day, none of us really know what's going to happen. Demand has shifted in very substantial ways at the university. We're thinking about, yes, we pivoted to online learning in a hurry in 2 weeks. We really pulled it off quite well. But now we're thinking about, what will the future look like? How many people will want to go back to the old ways? How many people will want a hybrid? How many people will want, whoever knows what will happen in the future? And similarly, on the supply of labor in particular, there is clearly a shortage that is only going to get worse, as Chris described. I see technology as a big piece of the solution. So much of the debate or the conversation we've been having is about technology displacing workers, and it's all been negative, negative, negative. This is an example where technology is actually a positive, because nobody really thought about what happens if there aren't enough workers. So you can talk about robots replacing people, but if there are no restaurant workers, then robots become essential. So advice sort of number one for companies is you really need to think about automation, especially where where workers are scarce and jobs are plentiful. And robots are getting extremely dexterous, tactile, be able to do tactile things. So I think important things. The other piece I would say is, when there is uncertainty, technology, specifically software, allows you to manage to that. So when you've got supply chain software, for example, because that's what we're focusing on, or unknown demand, you need to match supply and demand. It is often software that comes to the rescue. So let me stop there. But I think the idea is, we do have some challenges driven largely by uncertainty. And let's see how we can match supply and demand by using better technology.
What do you think, Chris? Do you think the technology will help cover some of the issues around the talent, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly, I agree with a lot of Vijay's comments about how, people are threatened by robots, but really, robots are not really a threat to a lot of people, especially the audience that's listening to this. I will say that I really view robots as kind of an international trade partner. Right. So if we think about trade with China, for example, all of us on average are much better off because we trade with China. Right. We're able to consume more. We're able to pay less prices. China is better off for that trade. And a similar issue with robots. Right. So robots do things that either we don't have enough people to do, or we're not interested in doing. But the downside is there are a small group of people who are significantly negatively affected by trade and by robots. And those are uneducated folks, or I'll say probably folks without a college degree from UCI, who now their job has been replaced and they don't have the skills to become a Google programmer or some other job that is in demand. So I think the idea of some kind of, being cognizant of needing to retool people replaced by robots is important, even though in aggregate we'll all be much better off.
And just piggybacking on both of you, I think one of the things that's going to be really important is how we use both artificial intelligence and machine learning to assess what's happening in the marketplace. What are these shifts? How can we begin to predict them so that we can be prepared and mobilize as organizations to deliver against them? And I think this is where, Chris, you're talking about robots and the like, and how they might be engaged in technology. Here's where data begins to help us significantly. But we also have to think about both big data and thick data, so that we understand not only what's happening, but what the underlying motivations are for why it's happening, and what that might portend for the future.
So Tanya, I'm just curious, I mean, Chris brought up a notion that the impact holistically around automation or forms of technology may be positive, but there may be segments that are disproportionately impacted in positive or negative ways. When we think about that on the consumer side, are there segments of the consumer population that will be more or less open to things like technology automation, or more or less negatively impacted? What are the segmentations you would think about or encourage people to think about on the consumption side?
I think one of the challenges that we've seen in the marketplace from the consumer and the business side is that individuals really like a community feel, but so much of technology requires organizations to be a bit larger. And so you can lose some of that community feel if you move, for example, to all chain outlets in your environment, because that's who can afford to be there. And so I do have some concerns about some of our mom and pops. I've seen some of this even in our local community, where they've suffered because they're not able to keep up with something as simple as DoorDash or Uber Eats, and they're not able to keep their doors open. So we don't want what's been called the McDonaldization of society. We don't want every community to look like the others. And so I do have some concerns about how do we ensure that our smaller businesses that actually provide some nuance and some interest and texture to our society, that we find ways for them to continue to exist, even as we're moving to more technology embedded in how we're delivering.
You know, Tanya, you bring up some really important points that I think we must address today. You know, so there's no question from all the research we've done at the center that digital technologies favor larger firms and obviously tech savvy firms. And so the chain restaurants perhaps will, you know, do better, especially when you have to pay 25 or 30% of your ticket price to the delivery companies. And delivery used to be an afterthought for pretty much every restaurant. And now it's front and center because these platforms have accumulated so much power that people sometimes are more loyal to the platform than to the restaurant itself. And, you know, restaurants have to change their menus so that the food actually is portable and is delivered with quality rather than presentation and appearance. So I think those are sort of important things. But the point I really want to touch on is disproportionately, as both Chris and you mentioned, it is sort of the lower income folks, the people in some of these professions like the restaurant industry, that will be the most affected. So there's the immediate short-term effect on what happens to these folks. The longer term effect is these were always also pathways for people, you know, to join the middle class. You know, David Chang, who owns this famous restaurant Momofuku, actually has an episode on Hulu called "Rise of the Machine," something like that, where he talks about all of these issues. You know, robots in restaurants replace the lower paid workers. And he reflects on his dad, who came over from Korea, I want to say North Korea, if I remember correctly, worked his way up from busboy all the way up to general manager of a restaurant. Those pathways where immigrants often started are not available anymore. So we do need to address sort of build policies to sort of make sure that people aren't left behind.
So this is just a really interesting question, because there's this broader, clearly one of the things that will continue in 2022 is just broader social issues that you know, cut across all aspects, certainly have an impact on business and certainly impact every aspect of business. I'd be curious, just, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, Vijay, you talked the notion of the pathways and how we create full participation across society. I mean, that has implications in the finance and economic space, the technology space, the marketing consumption space. Any reflections on how those issues should be thought of in companies as we go on through this year?
So I think there's a, you know, at the national level, people, that's not the question you're exactly asking, but, you know, people have talked about the notion of a universal basic income and things like that. So there's a whole set of macroeconomic policies that I want to acknowledge before I answer your specific question. But I think it's incumbent on all of us, universities and companies, to really invest in the education of our workforces and hopefully in the education of our communities. Because you know, people who go to universities and get a decent education will ultimately do okay. I see one of our biggest challenges as a society and as a country is making sure that people who don't naturally have those opportunities for socioeconomic reasons that we need to invest in that population, make sure they're aware of the opportunities, like what the Center for Investment and Wealth Management is doing, with its programming. And I know we're expanding that at the school level, but I think, and companies are investing in it. So I think we need more of a public-private partnership, but at least from where I sit, education is the way out of this dilemma, and we have to make sure that as many people as possible actually have the opportunity and the means to pursue an education for whatever suits them. But not everybody has to be in a business school, but there's lots and lots of professions where an education would help them.
Other thoughts?
I love how you speak to education and the notion of the public-private partnership. It's been probably, I don't know, 20, 25 years since I've been back in a classroom with, kind of K through 8 kids, helping them to understand how business actually works. And that used to be something that was done quite frequently between universities and kind of K through 12 education. And to your point, not everyone is going to go the traditional route from secondary education into collegiate level schooling, and that's okay. But we do need to ensure that people have access to pathways so that they can be able to take advantage of all of the opportunities that they have access to in their community. And education definitely is part of it, but we have to think very broadly about what that education is. I'd also like to layer on that we need to help our students understand, and I believe we do a really good job of this here at University of California, Irvine, that the education that they get here is not a punctuation. It's not the period. It's a comma to their career. Like, there's going to be things that happen after it, and we're giving you a solid foundation upon which to build. And I think that as we move forward, that's going to become even more important, that our students recognize that this is a step upon their trajectory. It's not the be all and end all.
So Chris, I got to bring you in, and I would love if you can maybe talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in the Center for Investment and Wealth Management, particularly around the Life Vest program, because I think it speaks clearly to one of the points that Vijay was making around how we invest in ensuring that we enlarge that pool of talent as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, so I think, and I just to before I start that, I mean, I agree 100% with all the comments. I think companies are making a big investment in helping potential first generation students get to college, because they realize that the only way to make the labor force cheaper for them is to make sure the labor force is bigger of college educated students. And so, at the center, we have a program called Life Vest that it's going to be the 12th year coming up of the program. And really its focus is a college-bound program focused on getting basically freshmen in high school, get them on campus here at UCI for a week. They stay in the dorms, eat dorm food, and we use financial literacy to prepare and motivate them to be the first in their families to go to college. And really the two big components of the program really are, one, I really think the residential component speaks to the students. A lot of them don't have anyone to talk to about what the college experience is like, and they don't have that vision of seeing themselves as college students. So I think, as much as anything, that's probably a very, one of the top 1 or 2 things the students always comment on when they come back as alumni. But the second piece is, I think, students who don't, maybe more blue collar job families, they don't really understand the opportunities that are out there for them, how accessible college is from a cost perspective. I mean, here at UC, I believe any UC school is tuition free for any family that makes less than $80,000 a year. So they don't understand just how affordable it is to go to college. And so those are a lot of the things that we teach the students. And I think the last part is students don't realize that they can become multimillionaires by just having, I'm going to call it a normal career. They think that they have to be a Kardashian or, some kind of like social media influencer. That's the only way they're going to be financially secure. And I think the most shocking moment's probably on the 5th day of the program, where they go through and realize that just by becoming a psychiatrist or a school teacher or, a doctor or an investment banker or whatever they want to be, we let them choose what their aspiration is, that they can be financially secure. So, we're hopeful this summer we'll have 200 students on campus here from Orange County, and really excited to, hopefully have the dorms back this year after 2 years of COVID. That'll be a nice touch.
And certainly, the success of this program over the last 12 years has been tremendous, and we're very keen at the business school to even expand that, to open up doors for these students to consider, careers that really bring in this intersection between business and technology, a lot of the things that you're focusing on in your center, Vijay, and how that becomes, those are the jobs that will be of the highest demand, and we really hope that those students are given exposure to that. I'd be curious, are there, all of us in our research, we go out and we look at different companies and seeing what they're doing and how they're addressing particular issues or doing it in innovative and novel ways. Any examples of organizations or leaders that you've seen that you go, they're onto something there. They've identified a novel approach to something that others can learn from. Anyone have any examples like that?
So I'm happy to kick off in response to that question. The companies that come to mind immediately are Moderna and Pfizer/BioNTech. I remember when the pandemic started in March 2020. I remember exactly the last day I taught my class was March 7, 2020. And people were visibly scared. I mean, some people had already stopped coming to class and no one knew what the future held. You remember when we were washing everything that came into our house and disinfectants were sold out, and to Tanya's comment about supply chain issues and what customers might suddenly prefer. But if you look at those processes that both BioNTech/Pfizer and Moderna have, and I actually spoke to the chief digital officer at Moderna, who's speaking to my class, by the way, in a few weeks. And it's fascinating to listen to, and obviously this is not the place to go into the details of what they've built, but they built this really interesting proprietary platform for mRNA that allows them to build just not a vaccine for COVID, but to build treatments for so many illnesses. And I think, machine learning plays a piece of it. It plays a significant role in it. And so and then you see things with sort of the rapid COVID testing that Abbott Labs has launched and other companies as well. So there is a pace of sort of technology-led innovation that I think the US is actually best in the world at. That sort of gives me optimistic, because we broke all the records for a vaccine. The record for a vaccine was 4+ years for mumps. Average time to a vaccine is 20+ years. And here we got 2 powerful vaccines and then a third in 10 months, and a little bit longer for the third, obviously. So I'm optimistic about sort of how technology is driving change. And I do want to plug UCI for a moment, if I can, because UCI has the best record in California in treating COVID patients among all hospitals in California. And one of the students who actually was part of that initiative was in my executive MBA class in 2021. And he talked about how they're using AI to predict who can be sent home safely and who needs to be hospitalized. And the way they describe it is very powerful. The 101st patient must benefit from the previous 100 patients, which I think is which again gets to Tanya's comment on sort of learning from data and machine learning and how you can use it for unforeseen situations and then do better using sort of this data. But let me turn it over to Chris or Tanya.
Yeah, you were talking about types of companies that are doing well. I would like to highlight an industry that is near and dear to my heart, and that's financial services. And they are notoriously horrible about being first movers when it comes to technology. It makes perfect sense, right? Nobody wants their bank to just glitch or their accounts to be wrong. So technology really matters. And so what I'm seeing in financial services and their employment of technology and the advancements that are being made in the various fintechs to ensure that backbone is secure, it's very encouraging, from the security side to how consumers are able to touch banks. Even credit unions now, you can deposit a check through your phone wherever you are, and that's a novelty, because credit unions were always far behind whatever banks had to offer. And I credit that to the fintech and all that's happening there. The other thing I'd want to point out is organizations that are developing technology to help patch both these archaic backends with some of the really interesting front ends. So there's kind of a smaller company called Telium out of Texas, and they're doing some really interesting things with technology that allow consumers or institutions actually to plug in anything that they've already got going. Think of it kind of like frosting. You can kind of put all these different components together so that the interface for the consumer and the support to the consumer takes advantage of all the information they have about that consumer, so that they're not just handing you off in customer service from one person to the next because they don't understand who you are in total to the institution. So I'm most excited about those technologies that are coming forward, which I know might sound strange from a marketing perspective. But again, going back to where I started, consumers' expectations are changing. And it's really important for institutions to change how they view their consumers and to view those consumers holistically. And the best way to do that is by leveraging technology. So I'm pretty excited about all of that. And again, like I said, I have a bias towards financial services. So I'm really thrilled to see it happening across those institutions in particular.
Hey, Chris, with your indulgence, let me just piggyback really quickly off what Tanya said, because I just read about this really cool example. So, you talked about workers, Chris, and Walmart just went out and bought a company called Even. And Even has a technology platform that allows workers to get advances on their salary without having to take out one of those ridiculously expensive payday loans. So, even on the workers' side, now companies like Walmart are being very innovative, buying these fintech companies that are actually serving, I'm not sure this is the right phrase, but some sort of social purpose. In this case, it's actually keeping their employees loyal as well. But these are little things that we can do with technology. We don't often think about the fact that somebody who gets a good or reasonable weekly wage may run out of money before he or she gets paid. And I think that's really important as well. But over to you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the difficult, well, we could probably take another 30-minute session to unpack all that, but I think payday loans are probably the most financial literacy problem that we have, right? And getting rid of those, and a lot of it's budgeting, personal finance budgeting, and things of that. In terms of, I think we talked about a lot of different topics here, and I don't want to point out one particular company. I know one here locally in Irvine, but just to keep it general, I think the companies that are trying to retain workers however they can, especially good workers, being a little bit more flexible with stay at home, or being a little bit more understanding about childcare issues, for example. I think those are the companies that are ultimately going to win. The challenge right now is, even at the best companies in the world that treat their employees well, there's so many options out there. And it's almost costless to move because you can almost work from anywhere now. It's really become a difficult problem retaining your workers. But I think that the best companies realize that, hey, if someone wants a 6% raise instead of 5%, it's a lot cheaper to give them 1% than it is to hire somebody new. And not that everyone's replaceable, for sure, even though I'm sure a lot of people don't think they're replaceable. Everybody's replaceable. But you have to weigh the pros and cons of paying that price. So so I think those companies that are being flexible are probably doing the best.
Well, listen, everyone, this has been fantastic. I'm mindful that there are other homecoming activities, and so we'll certainly want to let the audience go appreciate that. But Tanya, Vijay, Chris, thank you very much for sharing your expertise, your insight, your vision with the audience today. It's really given, I think, people a lot to think about for how they position themselves personally, but also if they are a leader in an organization, how they should be positioning their organization to really thrive during 2022. So thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the homecoming celebrations and has a great 2022.